I want to begin with an acknowledgement. Neither of the scriptures that you just heard are quite what I wanted to use this morning. What I wanted to build a sermon around was a passage that incorporates gratitude, evokes the gathering of people, preferably around a table for an anticipated meal, with awareness of those who are missing, and mindful of challenges, divisions that can make such a gathering difficult. And there would be bonus points if it also tied in with being a transition from Thanksgiving to Advent, with a casual nod that today is known as the Reign of Christ Sunday. What may not be a surprise to you, despite searching, I could not find such a passage. I don't think it exists. If any of you are aware, please see me afterwards. Instead, we have these two texts that build on a hope of God's care amidst losses. Many of us will gather with family and our friends on or around Thanksgiving. I hope for most of us that it will be a time of sharing good food and good conversation. But I know for others, it will be a challenging time for a variety of reasons. Political tensions are still high, with some celebrating and some grieving outcomes. In past election cycles, differences about which direction the country should go have been more about being fiscally conservative or liberal. I don't know about you, but I long for the innocence I once had in thinking that the real divisions about Thanksgiving came over whether or not you preferred white or dark turkey meat. Incidentally, not an issue for the vegetarians. The other essential issues, whether cranberry sauce is best from a can, whether mini marshmallows belong on a sweet potato casserole, what kind of pie is best to serve for dessert. How many of you have this as an idealized image of Thanksgiving? We live in different times. I love Thanksgiving, and it's complicated. I know families where members are struggling whether or not to gather at all. They're so concerned that they'll feel too vulnerable, uncertain if they can be in relationship with people who have a different worldview. Choices and perspectives rub up against fundamental values of others who would gather at the same table. This is in addition to the unique challenges that family systems dynamics already present and that complicate times together. It is a rich opportunity for psychologists and social workers to study patterns of enmeshment and estrangement. Because heartburn isn't just caused by eating too much rich food. As much as we may hope for this, some of us fear a gathering that's more like this. It isn't surprising that some people choose to sit this holiday out. What does it mean to be grateful? Because there are others for whom this holiday is intertwined with colonialism. The image many of us learned in school of pilgrims and Indians sitting down to a table of fellowship and sharing of resources whitewashes the reality of 400 years of brutality toward First Nations people. We make choices about how much to live into the kind of Thanksgiving we think we should try to reproduce, images that may never have been or that are altered by nostalgia. And then there is the painful awareness of those who are missing from the table. I was 6 when I experienced the first death in my family. My great-grandmother lived with my mom's side of the family, and I saw her almost every Sunday. Although I have few direct memories of her, what I know is mostly from pictures and stories that were passed down, things that she wrote, family memories. One thing I do remember at that first gathering without her was how odd it was to not hear her scold in her very strong Dutch accent, "This isn't a gymnasium," when my cousins and I chased each other around the house. Maybe some of you can identify. Over the years, there have been other family members who are no longer at the table. Both of my grandparents, my uncle, my mother. Others have joined, finding their place in the family system, creating new memories, hearing the stories of past gatherings, the ones that filled us with joy and the ones that were frustrating or that made us cry. Wednesday was Trans Day of Remembrance, and in the political realities that we're facing, we are aware of other kinds of losses. Those whose rejection has led to the loss of life. We lament hatred and intolerance of all kinds that prevent people from simply being able to live, to come together, to feel welcomed by family. Beyond holidays, no matter what your past may be like, whether it holds happy memories or struggles, we each know sorrows. It is part of human existence, part of the price we pay for having connection with one another. And Scripture doesn't pretend otherwise. The psalm that you heard today was likely written after a time of exile. The first verses are written in past tense, recalling a time of return. Feelings of being disconnected from heritage, disoriented from their own history, were replaced with hope and this promise of restoration. In the opening words, we hear a song of thanksgiving, remembering a personal or shared story of return. Laughter replaced tears. There's a sense of future that holds promise. It is a psalm of a people who have lived through nightmarish times and have been given the safety and assurance that they needed to be able to dream again. Looking back on what they had encountered and what they had survived, they were able to rejoice in what they saw as God's goodness. It wasn't only their lives that were affected by this restoration. Other nations, both friendly and hostile, could see it as well in the way that people can sometimes sense joy emanating from a stranger. And yet, for all their relief and rejoicing that the Israelites experienced, good times didn't last. The land of opportunities dried up like a drought that threatened the harvest. All the trauma and healing that they had experienced in the past would mean nothing if they couldn't survive this next hurdle, one that might have seemed like punishment for sins they knew and did not know. The verses include a prayer change our circumstances. Just as faith threatened to dry up like riverbeds in the Negeb, the people held on to a hope for rain, for something to replace a sense of being parched. I have been in the Negeb desert, an arid area where thirst for sustainable water and thirst for safety from invasion are palpable. I met with a family whose home had been bulldozed dozens of times as a form of intimidation. Their cry, like those of the psalmist and many of those whose sources of abundance never developed or have dried up, is for God's quenching spirit to wash over them. Meanwhile, they found strength in the support that they could give each other and in the remembrance of ancestors who tended the land before them. Because they know that in the desert, a good rain can transform dry waterways into gushing rivers in a very short amount of time. The space between sorrow and gladness is sometimes very thin. The psalmist holds out hope of God's goodness when there is not yet a sign of it. In present tense, the psalmist lifts up the tension between reality as it is seen and a reality not yet known. The New Revised Standard Version transitions from here to a vision of what could be. Those who water the ground with tears as they plant will reap a joyful harvest, returning home with a restored belief that hope is not so fragile or fleeting as they had earlier believed. The hymn Bringing in the Sheaves is from this psalm. The connection to harvest makes it one of the lectionary texts for Thanksgiving, with this image of a joyful reunion of people who have known sorrow and who will again be able to work in cooperation with the land. While things may not look so good, they will improve in the future. But the Common English Bible does something a little bit different. Instead of projecting into the future and holding out hope that the ground will again be fertile at some point, or that despair of this time will be replaced with more productive way of working together, CEB keeps the second half of the psalm in present tense. The images are the same, but this translation holds out hope of a joyful harvest in the midst of realities that are far from ideal right now. It is an act of faith to believe that there can be something joyful when tears are still running down our cheeks. It takes faith to believe that communities that are divided can still unite with common goals. It is possible because of the ways that God works in the world, and it is realized by the actions of people of faith who are willing to trust and work toward this vision, even when it seems just out of reach. Isaiah 25 shares that vision. It too begins with an acknowledgement of the ways that God has been faithful and is written in a time of upheaval. Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, only for Babylon to be overthrown not many years later. Isaiah holds space for God's deliverance and for feelings of hurt and anger and a desire for vengeance. Victories and losses are not sources of pride or despair in the framework of God's vision for community. Instead, the prophet envisions a feast of fine wines, of select foods, rich, the kind of gathering anyone would want to come. But it's not just for Judah, but for all of the nations to put aside sorrows, to embrace a different reality. In the church today, we carry this theme into Advent, an ultimate description of thanksgiving, the gratitude of people who were previously divided, who are brought together in God who comes and dwells among us, who will deliver and who is present with us. God will feed those who have experienced hunger, both of the body and those who hunger for deeper meaning. And as the people eat and drink in this image, God will swallow up death. The veil between life and death are torn asunder, put away. The empty chairs at the table will be filled, and all will sing songs of rejoicing. And all will be grateful. This is a vision for the future that is part of ancient prophecy, and we aren't there yet. But for those who mourn and grieve great losses, we hold a promise that those people and values we idealize and love and hold dear are not forgotten. We carry them in our memories and in our very senses, our stories, our desires to believe that there is more to life than what we can see, hear, eat, smell, touch. With God's vision of what can be, we commit ourselves here and now that we will work toward it. We are grateful, not only for what is, but for a vision that takes us beyond the places where we're currently stuck, in grief, in despair, in hopelessness. This is for the English folks, the English grammar folks. While we live in the present tense, faith allows us to imagine a future perfect. And if we can't get future perfect, then at least a little bit closer to shalom. We didn't include as a reading today, but I trust that many, if not all of you, are familiar with the 23rd Psalm. It also addresses God who provides shelter and a feast with awareness of sorrows. We know the psalm well, but I was recently introduced by a Jewish chaplain resident of the prayer book for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that has several other translations of these familiar words. And one of them particularly seems poignant to me. Without reading the entire psalm, some of the phrases include, "The Shekinah, a sheltering presence, makes me whole, empowering me to make life-affirming choices in celebration of God's name. Even though I have walked in darkness and known loss, I have not despaired, for you are with me. Your guidance and your nurturing spirit have sustained me. You have set a full table for me when I have been hurt and alienated. You have conferred upon me unique potential, which I strive to realize. From the deep core of my being, I am overflowing with gratitude." I love that. Instead of the traditional words, "You prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies," this version touches on the words of Isaiah, a gathering of all peoples, and it offers wholeness, nurturing that brings healing with awareness of loss. So however we may anticipate or feel tension around Thanksgiving, or other gatherings, or simply the challenges of everyday living, may God's Spirit sustain each of us so that we can feel gratitude that isn't bound by our present realities. As we prepare to remember those who are no longer with us, may we hold their memories with warmth and tenderness, a trust that their lives continue to shape, form, and guide us in all of our gatherings. May it be so.